They don't leave because you asked for too much. They leave because your need made them feel responsible. Avoidants don't fear women. They don't even fear intimacy in the way most people assume. What they fear is emotional obligation, the quiet, invisible pressure of being someone else's regulator. For an avoidant, closeness is not automatically comforting. Closeness activates a question deep in the nervous system. Am I about to be needed in a way I can't escape? And that question alone is enough to trigger distance. Most women never intend to create pressure. They're not doing anything wrong. They're simply doing what connection has taught them to do. Reach, lean, share, seek reassurance. But to an avoidant nervous system, certain signals don't land as love. They land as responsibility. When a woman unconsciously communicates, "Help me feel calm. Reassure me that this is secure. Show me I matter so I don't spiral." The avoidant doesn't hear vulnerability. They hear a future demand. Their body interprets it as, "Your emotional stability is about to depend on me." And that's where the exit reflex begins. Avoidants are wired around autonomy. Not independence in a healthy, empowered sense, but autonomy as survival. At some point in their emotional history, needing someone felt unsafe, disappointing, or overwhelming. So their system learned a rule: I stay safe by staying self-contained. When they feel that rule being threatened, even subtly, their body doesn't negotiate, it reacts. They pull back, they delay, they disappear emotionally or physically. Not because they don't care, but because care feels like a contract they never agreed to sign. This is why so many women feel blindsided. From their perspective, they were simply opening up. From the avoidance perspective, the relationship just shifted from choice to duty, and duty is the fastest way to make an avoidant run. It's important to understand this clearly. Most avoidants don't leave because a woman is too much. They leave because their nervous system believes it's about to be responsible for someone else's regulation. That's the pressure point, not her emotions, not her needs. But the implication that staying means carrying them. When safety starts to feel conditional on their presence, the avoidant doesn't argue. They escape. And the tragedy is this: the woman often interprets the withdrawal as rejection. But what the avoidant is actually rejecting is the loss of autonomy. Avoidants don't stay for love, they stay where they can breathe. A woman an avoidant doesn't run from isn't colder, detached, or emotionally unavailable. She's regulated. And that difference is everything. Her presence doesn't feel like a question mark hanging in the air. It doesn't feel like something they have to manage, maintain, or monitor. She doesn't cling, she doesn't hint. She doesn't emotionally hover to make sure the connection still exists. Not because she doesn't care, but because her sense of safety is an outsource. Her energy says, "I'm connected, not dependent." That single distinction changes how an avoidant experiences closeness. With her, intimacy doesn't feel like a slippery slope toward obligation. It feels optional, invited, safe to enter, and safe to exit. And paradoxically, that safety is what keeps them there. This woman enjoys the avoidant, she chooses them. But she doesn't need them to function emotionally. Her calm doesn't come from their texts. Her worth doesn't come from their consistency. Her stability doesn't collapse when space appears. So when distance happens, and it will, she doesn't chase it. She doesn't rush to close the gap. She doesn't demand reassurance to settle her nervous system. She stays rooted in herself. And to an avoidant, that feels like oxygen. Because for the first time, closeness doesn't equal captivity. This is the part most people misunderstand. Avoidants don't feel safer with less intimacy. They feel safer with less pressure inside intimacy. The woman they stay for doesn't make them the emotional center of her world. She already has one. So being with her feels additive, not consuming. To an avoidant nervous system, emotional self-sufficiency doesn't feel like rejection. It feels like freedom. And freedom is not something avoidants run from. It's what they're always searching for. That's why this dynamic feels so different to them. They don't sense urgency in her presence. They don't feel the subtle pull of prove something. They don't feel like they're being positioned as the solution to her internal state. So their guard drops, not because she convinced them, but because nothing inside her presence demands defense. And when defense isn't required, distance becomes unnecessary. This is why avoidants often stay longer and deeper with women who seem almost paradoxical, women who care but don't collapse, who are open but not anxiously reaching, who are warm but not emotionally dependent. not because these women are playing a role, but because they are secure in themselves. And security doesn't trigger an avoidance exit reflex, it disarms it. The more available you become, the less real you feel to them. Avoidants do not attach through pursuit. They don't bond because someone tries harder, explains more, or stays closer. They attach through contrast. This is one of the most misunderstood dynamics in avoidant relationships. When you chase, what you're really doing is removing space. And space, not closeness, is what allows an avoidant to feel. When you over-explain your feelings, you eliminate mystery. When you over-accommodate their behavior, you erase boundaries. When you over-pursue their attention, you flatten the dynamic. Nothing is left for their nervous system to orient toward. Avoidants don't move toward what's already leaning into them. They move toward what remains self-directed. The moment you begin to overfunction emotionally, the dynamic flips. You become predictable, accessible, always there. And to an avoidant, predictability without autonomy doesn't feel safe. It feels consuming. This is why chasing doesn't make you more valued. It makes you less distinct. Your emotional availability stops feeling like a choice and starts feeling like a given. And anything that feels guaranteed loses psychological weight. The woman an avoidant stays for doesn't disappear. She doesn't punish. She doesn't withdraw as a tact. She simply doesn't collapse toward them. She responds. She doesn't react. Her actions aren't driven by anxiety. They're driven by alignment. She invites connection. She doesn't pursue validation. She moves forward in her life without dragging the avoidant along or waiting for permission. And this creates something rare, tension, without threat. There's space for curiosity, space for reflection, space for the avoidant to notice absence without feeling abandoned. Because she hasn't vanished. She's just not orienting her entire emotional world around their availability. That distinction is critical. Avoidance need room to feel without pressure. Chasing fills that room with noise. Silence, distance, and space. When not charged with panic, allow the avoidant to reconnect with desire. Not obligation, not guilt, desire. The woman they stay for doesn't demand to be chosen. She remains choosable, and that's what keeps her real in their mind. They don't bond to intensity. They bond to regulation. Avoidants are not drawn to emotional fireworks. They're not impressed by dramatic vulnerability or heightened expression. Those things don't feel romantic to them. They feel destabilizing. Most avoidant nervous systems grew up around emotional inconsistency, unpredictability, high emotion followed by withdrawal. So when they encounter emotional intensity, their body doesn't register passion. It registers chaos. What feels magnetic to an avoidant is something far quieter, regulation. They're drawn to women who are calm under ambiguity, women who don't unravel when things aren't defined yet, women who can sit inside uncertainty without trying to force clarity. They're drawn to women who remain grounded when space appears, who don't take distance personally, who don't spiral into self-doubt when communication slows. They're drawn to women who are unshaken by silence. Not because silence doesn't matter, but because silence doesn't control them. This kind of stability feels rare to an avoidant, almost unfamiliar. And unfamiliar, in this case, feels safe. This woman doesn't panic when things slow down. She doesn't interpret pauses as danger. She doesn't rush to reestablish connection just to soothe her nervous system. She stays anchored in herself, and that anchoring creates a steady emotional field. In that field, the avoidant's nervous system finally gets to rest. There's no emotional spike to manage, no urgency to respond, no fear of causing harm by needing space. So instead of pulling away to regulate, they stay closer. This is the paradox most people miss. Avoidants don't leave because things are calm. They leave because things feel emotionally uncontainable. Stability isn't boring to them. It's relieving. This is why they often return to women who didn't react when they pulled back. Women who didn't chase. Women who didn't demand reassurance. Those women didn't try to hold them still. They simply remained steady. And steadiness builds trust faster than intensity ever could. The woman they stay for doesn't require them to manage her emotions. So they stop managing their distance. Her nervous system doesn't invade theirs. It coexists beside it. And that coexistence allows attachment to form naturally without pressure, without fear, without the urge to escape. Because when emotional stability is present, closeness no longer feels like a threat. It feels safe enough to stay. Avoidants pull away hardest from the woman they're afraid to lose. There is a paradox at the center of avoidant attachment that most people never see until they've lived it. The stronger the connection feels, the more distance the avoidant creates, not because the bond is weak, but because it matters. When an avoidant senses real strength in a woman, true self-respect, emotional boundaries, an identity that doesn't revolve around the relationship, their nervous system doesn't relax. It scans, it tests, it asks a quiet, unconscious question. Is this safe, or will this cost me myself? When an avoidant feels drawn to a woman who knows who she is, something shifts internally. This is not the dynamic they're used to. They are accustomed to relationships where emotional gravity pulls the other person toward them, where reassurance is requested, where closeness requires management. But this woman doesn't lean, she stands, and that standing triggers uncertainty. Strength introduces risk, the risk of loss. So they test, they go quiet, they delay responses, they create space where there used to be momentum. This behavior is often misinterpreted as indifference or manipulation. In reality, it's a stress response. The avoidant is not pulling away to punish. They are pulling away to assess. The test is not about control. It's about survival. Somewhere deep inside, the avoidant is asking, if I step back, will you step forward and abandon yourself to keep me? That question determines everything. If the woman chases the distance, explains herself excessively, or tries to resecure the bond through reassurance, the avoidant's fear is confirmed. The dynamic has tilted. Her emotional safety now depends on his availability. The avoidant feels the weight of responsibility settle in, and with it, the urge to escape intensifies. But the woman they stay for does something radically different. She doesn't chase the test. She doesn't confront it. She doesn't perform emotional labor to stabilize the connection. She simply continues being herself. She notices the space, but she doesn't collapse into it. She doesn't interpret distance as a threat to her worth. She doesn't rush to prove her value or secure her position. She lets the silence exist without filling it. And in doing so, she answers the avoidant's unspoken question without ever saying a word. No, she will not abandon herself. This response disarms the test completely. There is no power struggle, no emotional escalation, no loss of dignity. The avoidant is met with something unfamiliar, steadiness under pressure. And that steadiness earns respect, not performative respect, but nervous system respect. The kind that says, this person is not something I can destabilize to feel safe. That's the turning point. Avoidants don't commit because someone proves their devotion. They commit when someone proves their self-containment. When the avoidant realizes that closeness with this woman doesn't require managing her emotional state, something shifts. The testing stops. The fear softens. And for the first time, staying doesn't feel dangerous. She never negotiates for consistency. The woman an avoidant stays for has a line she does not cross, no matter how strong the connection feels. She does not negotiate for consistency. She does not plead for clarity. She does not interrogate distance. Not because she doesn't want reassurance, but because she understands something fundamental. Safety cannot be begged for. She doesn't ask, where do I stand? Because her worth is not contingent on positioning. She doesn't ask, why are you distant? Because she knows that explaining distance doesn't eliminate it. She doesn't ask, do you still care? Because care that needs to be extracted is already unstable. This isn't emotional coldness, it's emotional sovereignty. Her boundary is simple and unspoken. I only stay where effort is mutual. That standard isn't issued as a threat or ultimatum. It's lived quietly through her choices. She responds when there is connection. She steps back when there is inconsistency. She does not argue with behavior. She observes it, and that observation becomes a mirror. Avoidants are rarely confronted directly. Most people adapt around them, softening needs, lowering expectations, overfunctioning to preserve connection. But this woman doesn't adapt herself into invisibility. She allows the avoidant to see themselves clearly through the consequences of their own patterns. When effort drops, she doesn't compensate. When communication fades, she doesn't chase it. When presence becomes inconsistent, she doesn't negotiate it back into place. This creates a mirror the avoidant cannot ignore. In that mirror, the avoidant sees something unsettling. Their distance does not control her. Their inconsistency does not destabilize her. Their silence does not make them central. For the first time, their usual defenses don't grant leverage, and in that moment, something rare happens. The avoidant becomes conscious, not through confrontation, but through contrast. They begin to feel the absence of the woman, not as loss, but as consequence, not as abandonment, but as feedback. And feedback is something avoidance can work with. It's impersonal, it's clean, it doesn't demand emotional labor. It simply reflects reality. This is where growth becomes possible. Avoidants only grow where mirrors exist, because mirrors don't trap them. They inform them, they show them who they are being without demanding immediate change. And the woman who holds her line without hostility or pursuit becomes a safe reference point, not because she stays no matter what, but because she stays aligned with herself. That alignment is what makes her unforgettable. Not because she waited, not because she endured, but because she never negotiated her self-respect for proximity. And in the end, that's what teaches an avoidant how to stay. With her, closeness doesn't feel like a trap. For an avoidant, most relationships carry an invisible countdown. Even when things feel good, their nervous system is scanning for the moment closeness turns into expectation. The moment affection becomes obligation. The moment presence becomes something they have to maintain, rather than something they choose. That's why intimacy often feels like a narrowing corridor instead of an opening. But with this woman, something is different. She doesn't rush labels to secure certainty. She doesn't demand emotional disclosure to prove connection. She doesn't push timelines to relieve anxiety, not because she's indifferent, but because she understands that intimacy forced too quickly doesn't deepen, it destabilizes. She allows closeness to build at the pace the nervous system can actually tolerate, and that pacing matters more than chemistry ever could. Instead of feeling cornered by expectation, the avoidant feels invited into connection. There is no sense of being trapped by a future they didn't consent to. No pressure to define, declare, or promise before they're regulated enough to stay present. The relationship feels spacious, not consuming. That spaciousness is what allows desire to remain intact. When there is no urgency to lock things in, the avoidant doesn't feel the need to escape. When affection doesn't come with an emotional invoice, closeness stops triggering defense. It starts to feel safe to linger. This is the shift most people don't recognize. Avoidants don't need less intimacy. They need intimacy without coercion. Intimacy that doesn't ask them to abandon autonomy to access connection. This woman offers exactly that. Her openness doesn't come with a deadline. Her warmth doesn't come with a demand. Her presence doesn't come with pressure to perform emotionally on command. She lets moments be moments, not milestones. So the avoidant stays engaged longer, not because they're convinced, but because there's nothing to run from. When safety is present, distance becomes unnecessary, not as a strategy, not as a decision, but as a natural response. The avoidant doesn't need to regulate through withdrawal anymore. Their nervous system can stay where it is. And that's what commitment actually grows out of. Not pressure, but sustained safety. If you're doing this to keep them, it won't work. Everything described so far collapses the moment it becomes a performance. Avoidants are extraordinarily sensitive to incongruence. They may struggle with emotional expression, but they read energetic truth with precision. If self-respect is an act, they feel the hunger underneath. If calm is a mask, they sense the anxiety behind it. If detachment is a tactic, they feel the pull beneath the silence. And when they feel that pull, their defenses go right back up. The woman they stay for is not managing her behavior to get a result. She's not withholding to provoke pursuit. She's not regulating herself as a way to appear unbothered. She's genuinely grounded, and grounding cannot be faked for long. She's not performing confidence. She's rooted in it. Her boundaries don't fluctuate based on their behavior. Her sense of self doesn't expand or shrink depending on attention. Her emotional state doesn't hinge on whether she's chosen that day, because she already chose herself. That choice is what makes everything else believable. There's no desperation leaking through her composure, no hidden agenda in her patience, no silent bargaining happening beneath her restraint. So the avoidant doesn't feel manipulated. They feel respect, and respect is disarming. Avoidants are used to dynamics where closeness comes with covert expectations, where affection is exchanged for reassurance, where presence is leveraged to control outcome. But with this woman, there is no transaction. She isn't trying to be chosen by disappearing. She isn't trying to be valuable by enduring inconsistency. She isn't trying to prove worth by staying calm at her own expense. She is simply living in alignment with herself. That alignment is what bypasses the avoidance defenses. There's nothing to resist because nothing is being forced. There's nothing to escape because nothing is trying to contain them. This is why avoidance often soften with women who don't need the relationship to validate them. Women who are open but not invested in an outcome at the cost of their self-respect. Women whose calm doesn't feel like strategy, but truth. Authenticity creates safety faster than reassurance ever could. And when an avoidant feels that safety, their usual patterns lose relevance. They don't need to create distance to feel in control. They don't need to test to feel secure. They don't need to disappear to protect autonomy. Because autonomy isn't being threatened. In the presence of a woman who has already chosen herself, closeness no longer feels like surrender. It feels like a choice. And that is the only condition under which an avoidant can truly stay. They don't decide to commit. They notice they never left. For an avoidant, commitment rarely arrives as a conscious decision. There is no internal speech, no dramatic shift, no moment where they announce to themselves that they're ready. Instead, it unfolds quietly, almost accidentally. One day, they realize something has changed, not because of what they chose, but because of what they didn't do. They didn't pull away when things felt real. They didn't disappear when intimacy deepened. They didn't create distance to regain control. They simply stayed. This is how commitment forms in an avoidant nervous system, not through pressure or persuasion, but through sustained safety over time. The body learns before the mind ever catches up, and once the body no longer perceives threat, the old escape routes lose their urgency. They start texting without feeling watched. There's no sense of being monitored or evaluated. Communication feels voluntary again, not performative. They reach out because they want to, not because they're expected to. And that distinction is everything. They return without being chased. There's no anxiety-driven pursuit pulling them back into connection. No emotional labor required to re-enter the relationship. They come back because the space between them and the woman never felt hostile. It felt neutral, safe, uncharged. They stay without feeling trapped. There's no sensation of losing themselves inside the relationship. No fear that staying will require constant emotional availability or compromise of autonomy. Being close doesn't feel like a sacrifice. It feels like a preference. And at some point, the avoidant notices this pattern. They notice that leaving no longer brings relief. They notice that distance doesn't soothe them the way it used to. They notice that being present feels easier than being gone. This is the moment they realize they're staying, not because they were convinced, but because there's nothing pushing them away. The woman they stay for never required them to abandon themselves to love her. She didn't demand emotional contortions. She didn't ask for reassurance beyond what was naturally offered. She didn't need them to become a different person to remain connected. So they never had to run. This is the quiet truth of avoidant commitment. It happens when escape becomes unnecessary. When the nervous system no longer associates closeness with threat, distance stops serving a purpose, and without that purpose, the pattern dissolves. Avoidants don't stay for the perfect woman, they stay for the woman who doesn't need them to be different to feel safe. This entire dynamic is often misunderstood as a call to become colder, more distant, or emotionally unavailable. It isn't. It's not about withholding love, suppressing needs, or pretending not to care. Those are strategies, and strategies always collapse under the weight of time. What actually works is something much deeper and much quieter. Security. Becoming secure in yourself doesn't mean you stop wanting connection. It means your sense of safety no longer depends on another person's regulation. It means your worth doesn't rise and fall with attention. It means your nervous system can remain steady even when uncertainty appears. When that steadiness is present, your presence changes. It no longer demands reassurance. It no longer asks for proof. It no longer requires defense. And when your presence doesn't demand defense, an avoidant finally relaxes. Relaxation is the missing ingredient in every avoidant relationship, not passion, not chemistry, not intensity. Relaxation, the ability to be close without bracing for impact. the ability to stay without scanning for exits. Relaxed people don't run. They don't need to create distance to feel safe. They don't need to test to feel in control. They don't need to disappear to preserve autonomy. They can simply be there. This is why avoidants don't stay for perfection. Perfection is pressure. It invites evaluation and expectation. They stay for safety, the kind that doesn't ask them to perform, heal, or change on demand. The woman they stay for doesn't need them to be more expressive, more consistent, or more available to feel okay. She allows them to arrive as they are, while still honoring her own boundaries and self-respect. And that balance is rare, because it requires strength without rigidity, openness without dependency, warmth without demand. This isn't about becoming less emotional. It's about becoming emotionally self-led. It's about choosing yourself so fully that closeness becomes an addition, not a requirement. When you reach that place, the entire dynamic shifts. Avoidants don't feel chased. They don't feel tested. They don't feel trapped. They feel safe. And safety is the one thing that makes staying possible. That's the truth most people never hear. Not how to keep an avoidant, but how to become someone they don't need to run from. And when you become that person, staying is no longer a decision. It's simply what happens.